My name is Diane Hale, and the first sign that my 21-year-old son had decided I was moving into assisted living was a stack of empty boxes outside my front door. There were 24 of them. Blue plastic straps held them in bundles. I stood in the hallway holding my coffee. My car keys were in my other hand. I had a client call in 40 minutes. I had not ordered a single box. Then my phone buzzed with a message from my sister, Carol. She wrote, "I'm proud of you for making the safe choice after everything that happened." I read the message twice. Then I opened the family group chat and found a photograph of Trevor beside the sign for Maple Grove residents. Under it, he had written, "Mom's new chapter starts next month." My cousins had added hearts. Carol had offered to help pack. One cousin had volunteered my dining table to a young couple from church. Another asked about my books. Did Trevor want first choice? I was 40 years old. 9 months earlier, a van ran a red light. It hit the driver's side of my car. I had broken my left ankle and right wrist. The recovery had been slow, frustrating, and temporary. The boxes arrived 9 months later. I had been driving again for 5 months. I worked full-time, walked to the waterfront most mornings, handled my own accounts, and carried my own groceries upstairs. I had never toured Maple Grove. I was not planning to leave my home. I was not planning to give away my dining table. Most important, I had never agreed to any of it. Then my neighbor Lee sent me a real estate link. My 2-bedroom condo was marked, "Coming soon." The photographs were old. Trevor had taken them during Thanksgiving when he claimed he wanted pictures of the new shelves. The asking price was far below what similar units had sold for. The listing promised a fast closing and flexible possession. It also announced an open house that Sunday. In the agent notes, one sentence made my hand go cold. Seller transitioning to assisted living following an injury. Trevor was asleep in my guest room when I found the listing. He had moved in after the crash to help for 6 weeks. 7 months later, he was still there. He was trying to save his cabinet refinishing business. I walked down the hall, opened his door, and said his name once. He sat up, looked at my phone, and did not ask what was wrong. He already knew. "You weren't supposed to see that until tonight," he said. That was his first response. Not an apology, not an explanation. He sounded annoyed. The surprise had arrived out of order. I asked him why my home was for sale. He rubbed both hands over his face and said, "Because somebody had to make a decision before you got scared and talked yourself out of it again." There had been no first decision to talk myself out of. There had been no conversation, no tour, and no agreement. Yet Trevor had moving boxes at my door, a farewell dinner planned for Friday, and a public listing for the home I had spent 6 years building around the life I actually lived. What he did not know was that the document he had used to start all of this contained one sentence he had apparently never bothered to read. Before I tell you what that sentence said, take a moment to subscribe if family stories about boundaries and betrayal matter to you. And tell me in the comments what you would do if someone announced your future before asking for your permission. I thought I knew my answer that morning. It took me 3 days to understand. Trevor had not only arranged my next home, he had used the worst afternoon of my life. It became permission to control the rest of it. I was 18 when Trevor was born. My 19th birthday was 3 months away. His father and I married too young, worked opposite shifts, and spent years pretending exhaustion was the same thing as partnership. I finished community college 1 class at a time, while Trevor slept in a stroller beside the library desk. By 25, I had a translation certificate and steady contract work turning Spanish technical manuals into clear American English. The work was not glamorous, but it was exact. A valve was either open or closed. A warranty covered a part or it did not. One careless word could decide who carried the risk. That attention to detail paid rent, bought school shoes, and eventually gave me the down payment on my condo. Trevor's father and I divorced when Trevor was 12. There was no dramatic betrayal. We had simply become two tired people who worked better apart. I bought the condo 6 years ago when Trevor was 15. It was not a family inheritance or a gift. My savings covered most of it. The rest came from my divorce settlement. Every later payment came from my work. By then, he had finished a cabinet-making program and could look at a tired kitchen the way I looked at a bad translation. He saw what was wrong immediately, and he knew how to make people believe the repair would be simple. Trevor was warm, quick, and good with clients. He described new cabinet doors with easy confidence. Clients could almost smell dinner cooking. He also believed a strong idea should not have to wait for cash flow, signed orders, or a realistic lease. Trevor started Northline 2 years earlier. It was his first business. I covered the deposit on a used spray booth. I also helped him buy a second-hand van. I did not call the money a gift. I made him sign a repayment plan. He followed it for 7 months. Then a supplier delayed an order. A client canceled, and Trevor missed 2 payments. I told him we would reset the schedule. He thanked me and hugged me. The missed payments never came up again. That became our pattern. Trevor created momentum. I absorbed the impact when it stopped. I reviewed contracts he had already signed. I once covered a payroll gap because 3 workers had families and none of them had created his problem. I told myself each rescue was temporary. I also told myself a mother should not stand by while her only child lost everything over 1 bad month. The problem was that Trevor rarely had 1 bad month. He had a string of emergencies. Each was presented as the final obstacle before stability: a broken compressor, a late commercial payment, a van repair that could not wait. He was not lazy. He worked harder than anyone I knew. He treated every boundary as a delay. Love, in his view, should remove it. Then the crash happened. Trevor reached the hospital before Carol did. He sat beside my bed while a nurse cut the sleeve from my coat and asked me the same questions until I could answer them without shaking. My car was totaled. I could not sign forms easily with my wrist in a brace, and the insurance company needed someone to release the vehicle from storage. I signed a limited power of attorney so Trevor could handle that claim and sell that one damaged car. The document named the insurer and claim. It also named the vehicle identification number. It also said the authority ended when the car was transferred and the insurance payment reached my account. Trevor handled those tasks correctly. I thanked him. I trusted him. Afterward, I kept my copy in a file box. I assumed his copy had become useless with the claim. Trust often leaves no sound when it breaks. Sometimes it looks like a son scanning an old document while his mother is in the next room trying to fasten a button with one good hand. Carol took me home for 6 weeks. Her house had no stairs. When I returned to the condo, Trevor moved into the guest room for a little while so I would not have to carry laundry or drive to appointments. At first, I was grateful. He made coffee before I woke up. He replaced a loose cabinet hinge. He drove me to therapy. He waited without complaining. Soon, I no longer needed the rides. By then, Northline was in trouble. Trevor's apartment lease ended. He said moving twice in 1 year made no sense. I let him stay. Helping had already become our family language. My ankle was still stiff in the mornings. That was when he first mentioned Maple Grove. A television commercial showed bright furnished apartments, meal delivery, transportation, and staff available for adults recovering after injuries. Trevor nodded toward the screen. "That place actually looks nice," he said. I agreed that it looked comfortable. He asked whether I had considered staying there. I said I already felt completely safe. I told him I already felt safe. My building had an elevator and maintenance staff. Lee lived across the hall. He said Maple Grove had meals and transportation. I liked cooking. I had also been cleared to drive. A glossy brochure appeared beside my mail a week later. Trevor said someone at a home show had given it to him. I wrote, "Not for me," across the cover and put it in the recycling. Another copy appeared on the kitchen counter with a yellow note attached. "Worth a tour." I wrote "No" across the note and left it where he would see it. That night, he called it a practical conversation. He said I was treating it like an insult. I said recovery was not a permanent identity. He answered, "Why wait? Why risk another accident before making the smart choice?" I asked what exactly he thought I could no longer do. He had no answer that did not turn one violent afternoon on a wet road into a permanent description of me. I should have told him to move out then. Instead, I softened the moment. I said I might choose a smaller place someday after the mortgage was lower and I wanted a different neighborhood. Someday was not a plan, and it was not his decision. Trevor heard the word smaller and ignored every word around it. Relief crossed his face. He acted as if I had finally admitted he was right. 3 days later, he asked about the insurance papers. He wanted to know where I kept them. He blamed a question from his bookkeeper. It concerned the money I had lent him for the van. I said my bank statements would answer that question. Still, I showed him the folder. I did not watch him take the pages to the printer. I did not know he saved another copy of the power of attorney. The moving boxes arrived that morning. Trevor followed me into the kitchen. He spoke gently, which somehow made the words worse. Maple Grove had one furnished unit left. Trevor said the monthly rate was favorable. He said the condo market might cool. He said I would have fewer responsibilities while I finished recovering. Then he added, "And the timing helps everybody." I asked who everybody was. He opened the refrigerator and stared inside. Then he admitted Northline had a lender deadline. He had 2 weeks to bring a large equipment balance current or lose the spray booth and the van. "What does that have to do with my condo?" I asked. Trevor poured orange juice and said the sale would cover Maple Grove first. Then there would be extra equity, and it made no sense for it to sit in a wall while the family business collapsed. He said family business as if I owned shares. I did not. The balance was $46,000. He said it quickly. Then he explained what 3 upcoming jobs would bring in. I stopped him. I asked whether he expected me to give him $46,000 from the sale of my home. He called it a bridge, not a gift. I reminded him he still owed me for the spray booth. His jaw tightened. "You're going to get all of this back eventually," he said. He gestured around my kitchen. The room went very quiet. I asked what he meant by eventually. He looked at the floor. Then he said the sentence people use when they want something ugly to sound like arithmetic. "I'm your only child." Trevor had called the condo home and the place. He had never claimed it as future property while I was standing inside it. I said, "Being my son does not make you a co-owner." He replied that I was twisting his words. I told him I was repeating them. Then I asked for the listing to be removed by noon. Trevor folded his arms. "It is only a coming soon page. Nobody can buy anything without you." I asked how the page had gone online. He said he had shown the agent my power of attorney and explained that I wanted him to manage the transition. The confidence in his voice told me he believed the words power of attorney mattered more than the paragraph that limited them. I told him the document applied only to my insurance claim and totaled car. The authority had ended months earlier. He blinked once. Then he said, "That is not how she read it." I asked who she was. He gave me the agent's name, Jenna Brooks. She had already scheduled new photographs and a floor plan visit. I pointed to the listing. "These are photographs," he shrugged. "Temporary ones. The professional shoot is tomorrow." That was when I understood the boxes were not the beginning. They were the part I happened to see. Behind them were calls, emails, a facility reservation, an agent, a price, and a family announcement. Trevor had built a road out of my recovery and expected me to walk down it because turning around would inconvenience too many people. I sent him a text while he stood across from me. It said, You do not have permission to list, photograph, market, show, enter into an agreement concerning, or sell my condo. Remove every advertisement and cancel every appointment today. I wanted the words in writing. Trevor read them and gave a tired laugh. This is why I tried to handle it, he said. You turn everything into a contract. I told him contracts were useful when people ignored clear speech. He said I was overreacting. The crash, he claimed, had made me afraid of losing control. I said I was angry because the family had been told a lie. He promised to pause everything and walked out with his keys. At 11:30, the listing was still online. At noon, the open house banner appeared. At 12:15, Carol called. She said Trevor had asked everyone to give me space because returning to normal after an accident could make people defensive. That word had not come from Carol. It had come from my son. I asked exactly what he had told her. She hesitated. Then she said he claimed I was still unsteady on stairs, nervous about driving, and overwhelmed by the condo since the crash. None of it was true. My building had an elevator and maintenance staff. Lee lived across the hall. I had driven Carol to lunch the week before. I had more work than I needed. Carol said, he made it sound like you asked him to organize things. He said the move was temporary. I told her I had asked him to remove the listing. She went silent. Then she asked whether I was certain I had not agreed to a tour while I was taking pain medication after the crash. I told her I was certain. Her question showed how carefully Trevor had prepared the story. He had left her just enough doubt. He had not said I was confused. That would have been too obvious. He had said I was exhausted. He had not said I was incapable. He had said I needed support. Every sentence left him room to look caring, while making my refusal sound like proof that he was right. I called Jenna Brooks. Her assistant answered. She asked whether I wanted to schedule a private showing. I said I was the owner. The line went quiet, then music played for less than a minute. Jenna came on sounding brisk and cheerful. Then I said I had never authorized the listing. She stopped speaking for several seconds. She asked me to confirm my address and the name on the deed. I did. She asked whether Trevor Hale was my son. Then she asked whether I had signed a power of attorney. I said I had signed a limited document 9 months earlier so he could handle a vehicle claim while my wrist was injured. It gave him no authority over real estate. Jenna's sales tone disappeared. She asked for a photograph of my driver's license and a copy of the deed through her secure portal. I sent both while we stayed on the phone. Then she said, "Ms. Hale, I am taking the page down now." The listing vanished 7 minutes later. Jenna sent a written withdrawal and an apology. She admitted Trevor had pushed her to post the condo as coming soon before title review was complete. I asked whether she had read it. She had reviewed the first page and signature page. Her broker had opened the complete copy that morning. The broker noticed that the authority clause named an insurer, a vehicle identification number, and one totaled car. That was the sentence Trevor had apparently decided did not matter. Jenna sounded ashamed. She should have verified everything before the page went live. She knew it. She offered to put her broker on the call. I said I wanted every message Trevor had sent about my property and every form carrying my name. She agreed after confirming I was the owner. I was the person she should have contacted. The email packet arrived before 1 o'clock. I opened it at my desk and found 23 pages. There was no sales contract. There could not have been one without my signature. But there was enough to show his plan. Trevor had chosen a price nearly $60,000 below Jenna's suggested range because he wanted a fast offer. He wrote, "My mother values certainty over squeezing out every dollar." In another message, he said I preferred not to deal with showings and would stay with Carol once the property went active. I had not agreed to stay anywhere. He also asked whether closing funds could be separated into a supported housing reserve and a family business obligation. Jenna replied that proceeds would go to the owner through escrow, and that any later transfer required my direction. Trevor answered, she will sign once the plan is in front of her. Since the accident, too many options overwhelm her. I read that sentence until the words blurred. I was not overwhelmed by options. I was surrounded by decisions someone else had made and labeled as care. One asks what you want, the other moves the boxes first. At the end of the packet was an email sent at 2 in the morning. Trevor told Jenna the sale needed to close before the 15th because a lender was forcing a decision. He said delaying would destroy something he had spent 2 years building. Then he added, my mother understands that the condo will be mine someday anyway. I printed that page. I did not need a binder or every careless sentence. I needed one clean piece of truth in my hand. My son had not made a clumsy mistake while trying to protect me. He had treated my recovery as a scheduling problem. He had done the same with my home and future. At 2:30, I called Maple Grove residence. A woman named Susan answered. I told her my name and asked whether anyone had reserved an apartment for me. She became careful and said she could not discuss another person's account. I told her the account used my name and that I had not created it. After she verified my information, Susan confirmed Trevor had paid a refundable holding fee for a furnished unit in Maple Grove's supported living wing. The wing accepted adults recovering from injuries. It also served residents who wanted ongoing help. Trevor had described himself as my financial representative and said I wanted a temporary stay that could become permanent. He had not provided valid authorization. Maple Grove had no signed agreement from me. The hold could not become a residency contract without my direct consent. I asked whether he had told them I required assisted living. Susan said he described me as independent but anxious after a crash. To the facility, he presented me as a customer choosing convenience. To the family, he told a different story. I was a woman who could no longer live alone safely. He adjusted the story to whatever made the listener cooperate. Susan canceled the hold under my name. She marked the file to require direct contact from me. The fee would return to Trevor because he had paid it. Before we ended the call, Susan said, "For what it is worth, you are not the first person whose relative tried to get ahead of a decision." I told her this was not getting ahead of a decision, it was replacing one. She said, "You are right." Hearing a stranger say that nearly broke me. I did not doubt my memory. But every person close to me had been handed Trevor's version first. At 3, I called him. He did not answer. I left one message. I said the listing was down. Maple Grove had canceled the hold, and he needed to come home prepared to explain why he had used an expired vehicle document to market my condo. I did not mention the lender email. I wanted to hear what he chose to tell me without knowing what I knew. Trevor arrived after 8. He carried takeout from my favorite Thai restaurant. He had always been good at finding a useful version of kindness. It made every hard question feel rude. He set the bag on the counter. He said we should eat before the food got cold. I told him the food could wait. He looked at the empty wall where the brochure had been. Then he said, "I know you are upset." I asked why he had priced my condo below market. He said speed mattered more than perfection. I asked why speed mattered. Trevor walked to the window. The lights from the port cranes moved beyond the glass. He said the lender had accelerated part of Northline's equipment debt after he missed a payment. He had to bring the balance current. Otherwise, the lender could take the spray booth and the van. Without them, he would lose current jobs and probably the workshop. I asked whether the balance was $46,000. He turned around fast. Jenna's packet had told me something he hoped to control. "She had no right to send you my emails," he said. I reminded him that the emails were about selling my property under my name. He started pacing. He said the business was not failing. It was caught between receivables and debt. 2 clients owed him money. A restaurant project would begin in 6 weeks. Every explanation might have been true. None of them gave him the right to turn my home into emergency cash. Then he said something softer. I was trying to solve both problems at once. I asked him to name my problem. He said the crash proved I was one bad day away from needing help again. I pointed out that I had finished physical therapy, returned to work, replaced my car, and spent the previous Saturday walking through the farmer's market with Carol. Trevor said recovery did not erase risk. I said risk did not transfer ownership. He sat at the table and pressed his palms together. You always said you never wanted to become a burden. I had said I never wanted Trevor to feel trapped. That applied only if I truly needed care someday. I had not said he could invent that day at 40, because his lender wanted money before the 15th. He said Maple Grove would protect me for a year. It would also release equity. I said he kept describing the money first and the care second. Then I told him to cancel Friday's dinner and tell the family the truth. Trevor said the dinner could help us talk calmly. The people coming cared about both of us. I said no. He said Carol had changed her work schedule and 2 cousins were driving in. I repeated that he needed to cancel. His face hardened. So everybody has to rearrange their lives because you refuse to admit the accident changed things? I asked what exactly he had rearranged for me. He said he had moved in and driven me to appointments. He claimed Northline had come second for months. That was the first time I heard the invoice underneath his care. I reminded him I had asked for help for 6 weeks. I had thanked him and fed him. I had also given him a free room and covered the higher utilities. I had never asked him to surrender his future. You stayed because you decided to stay, I said. You do not get to turn care I accepted into authority I never gave. He stared at me with real hurt. For a moment, I saw the boy who used to save half his Halloween candy for me. Then he said, "Fine, let the workshop die. At least you will still have your view." He went to the guest room and closed the door. I sat alone with 2 containers of cooling noodles. Then came the first real temptation to rescue him. That is the part I am not proud of. I knew what he had done. I knew he had lied. Still, my mind began calculating what I could lend without selling the condo. I opened my emergency savings, then closed the screen. I looked at my retirement account. Then I reminded myself that money was already doing a job. Trevor called any resource trapped when it was not moving toward him. Around midnight, I knocked on his door. I told him I would consider a limited loan only if he gave me complete business records, canceled the dinner, removed every appointment, and admitted to the family that I had never agreed to move. I was trying to create a path back to honesty. Trevor heard only the words consider and loan. He came into the hall and hugged me. I knew we could fix this, he said. I stepped back and repeated the conditions. He nodded too quickly and promised to bring the records in the morning. By breakfast, he had turned my conditional offer into permission. Carol called before 9. She sounded relieved. Trevor said you 2 worked it out, she said. I asked what that meant. She said the farewell dinner was still on and had become a planning meeting. Trevor had told her I was open to selling. Once, everyone helped me feel secure about Maple Grove. I walked into the kitchen while she was speaking. Trevor was at the counter answering email. I put the phone on speaker and asked him to correct the statement. He looked at the screen, then at me. Mom is still processing what the crash took from her, he said. Carol went silent. I ended the call. That was my failed attempt. I had offered him one narrow chance to be honest. He used it to widen the story. I realized compromise was not calming the conflict. It was giving him new material. If you have ever set a condition and watched someone repeat only the part that benefited them, you know the strange exhaustion of that moment. Tell me in the comments where you drew the line. I had spent years believing clear words could fix almost anything. With Trevor, clear words had become raw material for negotiation. I asked for the business records. He said his bookkeeper was preparing them. I asked for the lender notice. He said it contained confidential company information. I reminded him that he wanted my money. He accused me of making him beg. I said he had already tried something worse than begging. At 10, the building manager called. A photographer was in the lobby. A man with a measuring device stood beside her. They said they had an appointment to prepare my unit for sale. Trevor had not canceled them. I told the manager to send them upstairs. Trevor looked almost pleased, as if professionals arriving made his plan more legitimate. The photographer introduced herself as Mina. The other man was measuring rooms for a floor plan, not performing an appraisal. They both believed I had agreed to the visit. I invited them in long enough to explain that the property was not for sale and the appointment had been arranged without my permission. Mina apologized and packed her camera. The floor plan technician showed me his work order. Under client notes, Trevor had written, "Owner remains anxious after collision and may become emotional about the transition. Direct scheduling questions to son." He had not called me incapable. He had instructed strangers to treat my objections as part of my recovery. I asked for a copy of the work order. Trevor stepped forward and said that was unnecessary. Mina looked from him to me and handed me the page. Then she canceled the invoice before leaving. The building manager deactivated the temporary vendor past Trevor had created through the resident portal. When the door closed, Trevor said I had humiliated him. I asked whether that feeling was worse than having strangers enter your home to measure it for a sale you never approved. He said they were doing their jobs. I answered, so was I when I stopped them. He grabbed his jacket and left. 10 minutes later, I received an email from him with the subject line, "Friday Family Meeting." He had copied Carol and 4 relatives. The message said emotions were high, but the family still needed to discuss my recovery transition and the financial choices connected to it. At the bottom, he attached an agenda. The first item was Maple Grove, the second was the condo sale, the third was distribution of remaining funds. He had written the agenda as if my future were a committee project, and my property were already cash waiting to be divided. I replied to everyone. I wrote, "I am not moving. My condo is not for sale. Trevor had no permission to list it. There will be no discussion of distributing my money." I kept it short because facts do not become stronger when you decorate them. Carol called within a minute. This time she did not ask whether I was certain. She asked whether Trevor had truly listed the condo without permission. I said yes. I sent her the withdrawn listing, the work order, and the page from his email to Jenna. Carol read quietly, then she whispered, "He told us you asked him to do this." I said, "I know." She asked whether Friday was canceled. I looked at the moving boxes still stacked by my front door. Then, I made the decision that changed the rest of the week. "No," I said, "let everyone come." I did not keep the dinner because Trevor deserved a hearing. He had already held one without me. I kept it because every relative he had recruited needed to hear the same facts at the same time. I was done correcting his story one phone call at a time. That afternoon, I met with Rose Bennett. Her office was 2 blocks from the courthouse. She specialized in estate planning and disputes involving financial authority. I did not ask her to punish Trevor. I asked her to make certain he could not use my name, home, accounts, or old papers again. Rose read the vehicle power of attorney from beginning to end. She tapped the paragraph containing the claim number and vehicle identification number. "This was limited to the insurance claim and transfer of that car," she said. "It did not authorize a real estate listing." The insurance payment had ended the authority, but she still prepared a written revocation so no one could pretend there was uncertainty. She drafted notices for Jenna's brokerage, my bank, Maple Grove, the insurer, and my building manager. The notices did not accuse Trevor of a crime. They stated a simple boundary. He had no authority to act for me. Any future request in my name required direct confirmation. Then Rose asked whether Trevor paid rent. I said no. She asked whether we had a written agreement. I said the arrangement was supposed to last 6 weeks. It had lasted 7 months. She explained the safest way to end his occupancy under local rules and prepared a formal notice with a move-out date at the end of the following month. I stared at that page longer than I had stared at the revocation. Stopping a false listing felt obvious. Telling my 21-year-old son to leave felt personal. Rose did not rush me. She said, "A boundary is not less necessary because it hurts to enforce." I signed both documents. My hand shook on the move-out notice. That did not mean the decision was wrong. It meant the relationship mattered. Before I left, Rose asked whether I wanted to change the people named in my will and emergency documents. Trevor was still my beneficiary, and I was not ready to change that while angry. We changed only the person authorized to manage my affairs if I ever truly needed help. I named Carol first and Lee second. Trevor's name came off every emergency roll. That choice was not revenge. A person who had used narrow authority to redesign my life could not remain the person trusted with broader authority later. Love did not require me to ignore evidence. At home, I changed every important password. That included email, banking, the building portal, and cloud storage. I removed Trevor from the family phone plan. I had continued paying after he moved in. I scheduled the change for the end of the month, so he had time to open his own account. Then I called a locksmith. My condo door used a physical key and a keypad. The administrative code would change after dinner. Trevor's resident code and key would remain valid until he moved. Rose had warned me not to create an illegal lockout while he was still a resident. The distinction mattered. I wanted control, not chaos. The locksmith reset the administrative code. He also prepared a new cylinder to install after Trevor left. He did not ask why. When Trevor returned that evening, he found Rose's notice on the kitchen table. He read the first page, then the second. His face went pale. "You are evicting me?" he asked. I said I was ending a temporary arrangement he had used to gain access to my home and documents. He said he had nowhere to go. I reminded him he had more than a month. His business leased a workshop with a small office, though sleeping there would violate the lease. I told him to find legal housing the same way every other adult did. He called the notice cruel. I asked whether it was crueler than promising my dining table to strangers. He said that had been Carol's idea. I asked whether Carol had listed my condo. He looked away. Then he tore the notice in half. I reached into my folder and placed a second copy on the table. "That one is yours," I said. "The signed copy and proof of delivery are with my attorney." He stared at me. For the first time all week, he understood that destroying paper did not erase a decision. Trevor said Friday's dinner was off. I told him it was still on. He laughed without humor. "You want an audience?" I said, "You already invited one." He accused me of planning to shame him in front of the family. I told him the truth would not be tailored around his comfort. He spent Thursday away from the condo. I heard him moving in the guest room after midnight. Drawers opened and boxes closed. At one point, I almost knocked on his door. I wanted to say we could cancel everything and talk alone. Then I remembered we had already talked alone. Each private conversation had become another announcement he made for me. Friday morning, Carol came over. She brought coffee and looked at the bundles of empty boxes. "He sent those?" she asked. I nodded. She put one hand on the top bundle. I believed him because he sounded so certain. I did not blame her, but I did not let her escape the lesson either. Next time someone tells you I have made a life-changing decision, ask me. Carol's eyes filled. She apologized without adding an excuse. It was the first real apology I heard all week. She helped me prepare the dining room. Trevor had ordered a cake with white icing. It read, "New Beginnings, Diane." We did not throw it away. I placed it in the center of the table. The lie deserved to be visible. Beside the cake, I set the Maple Grove brochure, the withdrawn listing, the work order, the lender email, the full vehicle power of attorney, and Rose's revocation. 6 items, each answered one question. I did not need a lifetime of records. I needed the plan he had made that week. Carol asked what I wanted from the dinner. I said I wanted the family to understand 3 things. I was not moving. My home was not funding Trevor's debt. No one would ever again treat his confidence as my consent. She asked what I wanted from Trevor. That question was harder. I wanted him to become the son I believed he was. I wanted him to feel the harm before he felt the consequences. But I could not make insight one of my conditions. I could require only behavior. I want him to leave by the date on the notice, I said. I want him to stop speaking for me. After that, what happens between us depends on what he does without access to my money. The first relatives arrived at 6. My cousin Ellen brought flowers. Carol's husband carried a folding chair because Trevor had warned everyone that my furniture might already be packed. 2 more relatives arrived with a bottle of wine and careful smiles. They looked around the fully furnished room as if they expected proof that I had forgotten my own move. I thanked them for coming and asked them not to discuss anything until Trevor arrived. The cake sat between us like a prop from someone else's life. Nobody touched it. Trevor came in at 6:20 carrying another Maple Grove folder and a black leather portfolio. He wore the blue shirt he used for client presentations. When he saw the documents on my table, he stopped. Then he smiled at the room and said, "I guess Mom has been busy." He took the chair at the head of my table. I had intended to sit there, but I let him. Sometimes the clearest way to expose an assumption is to let it occupy the room for a minute. Trevor thanked everyone for coming. He said the week had been stressful. Recovery was complicated, especially when a person wanted life to look exactly as it had before an accident. He said he loved me and wanted my next chapter to be secure. Then he opened his portfolio and passed around a page titled Diane's Transition Plan. The page divided the next month into tasks: pack the condo, complete the sale, move me into Maple Grove, set aside 1 year of housing costs, address Northline's temporary obligation, distribute keepsakes. Trevor had placed his business debt between my housing and my possessions as if all 3 belonged on the same family checklist. I asked him to stop. He held up one hand and said, "Please let me finish, Mom." Several relatives looked down. That gesture was polished, patient, and familiar. It was how he spoke to a client who had questioned a change order. He wanted the room to see a reasonable son managing an emotional interruption. I said, "You have been finishing my sentences all week. Tonight, I will finish my own." Then I took the page from Carol and placed it beside the cake. Trevor leaned back. "Fine," he said, "tell everyone why you changed your mind." I told them I had never made the decision he announced. I had never agreed to Maple Grove. I had never authorized a listing. I had never promised sale proceeds to Northline. There was no changed mind, because there had been no original yes. Ellen looked at Trevor. Carol's husband stopped turning the wine bottle in his hands. Trevor said the situation was more complicated than yes or no. I said ownership and consent were often exactly that simple. He opened the Maple Grove folder and removed a reservation form. "This is not assisted living the way everyone imagines," he said. "It is a supported apartment. You could recover without pressure." I reminded him that my doctor had released me months earlier. I worked every day, and I had written "not for me" across the brochure. Trevor said I had also talked about choosing a smaller home. I agreed. Then I explained the rest of the sentence he kept removing. Someday was not next month. A possibility was not consent. A woman thinking aloud in her own kitchen was not an instruction to sell her home. Trevor turned to the family. You all know she worries about another crash. I said, I worry every time I enter that intersection. Fear is not a deed transfer. Carol asked whether I had ever requested the reservation. Trevor said I had been resistant to formal steps, but receptive to support. I slid the Maple Grove cancellation across the table. The facility had no authorization from me. The hold was paid by him and canceled by me. He barely looked at it. A refundable hold is not a commitment, he said. I agreed. Then why did you announce my move as a commitment? No one spoke. Trevor closed the folder and opened the black portfolio. He removed the old power of attorney and laid it flat. I had authority to handle major decisions after the accident, he said. This was not some random piece of paper. I placed the complete document beside his hand. Then I pointed to the paragraph naming my insurer, the claim number, and the totaled car. I read the sentence aloud. It authorized him to release that vehicle, sign insurance forms for that claim, and accept the settlement check on my behalf. The authority ended when the car was transferred and the payment reached my account. My condo did not appear anywhere. Trevor said Jenna had accepted it. I placed the brokerage withdrawal on top. Jenna had posted the coming soon page before full review, then removed it as soon as her broker confirmed I had never approved the listing. The broker's letter stated that Trevor had no authority over my real estate. He looked around the table and said, "So the agent made a technical mistake. That does not change the larger issue." That sentence showed me how far he had traveled from the son I knew. My ownership had become a technical detail. His debt was the larger issue. I asked Ellen to read the asking price from the withdrawn listing. She did. Then I gave her Jenna's suggested range. It was nearly $60,000 higher. Trevor had chosen the lower price for speed. He needed a closing before the 15th. He said speed would have protected me from market risk. I placed his email on the table. The room heard the actual reason in his own words. A lender was forcing a decision. Northline needed $46,000. My condo, he wrote, would be his someday anyway. Trevor's face went red. He said the message was private and taken out of context. I asked what context changed the meaning of the condo will be mine someday anyway. He said every parent planned to leave something to a child. I said a possible inheritance was not a current account he could draw from at 21, while his 40-year-old mother was still living in the home. Carol asked the question he had avoided all week. Were you going to take money from the sale? Trevor said he would have borrowed only what remained after my housing was secure. Carol asked whether I had agreed. He did not answer. I waited, so did everyone else. Finally, he said, she has helped before. That was the moment the room changed. Until then, Trevor had hidden behind concern, recovery, and family duty. With those 4 words, the plan became what it had always been. He expected rescue because rescue had happened before. I said, yes, I helped before. I covered a payroll gap. I adjusted a loan. I gave you a room for 6 weeks and let you stay for 7 months. Every time I saved you from a consequence, you learned that my boundary was only the first price in a negotiation. Trevor looked at me with tears in his eyes. They were real. His fear was real. So was the fact that he had put that fear above my right to choose. He said, if Northline closes, I lose 2 years of my life. I told him I understood. I had watched him build it. I had also spent 6 years paying for the home he tried to sell and more than 20 years building a life after becoming a mother at 18. His work did not become more valuable because he was willing to spend mine to save it. He stood and pushed the chair back. What do you want me to do? Lose the van, shut the workshop, tell my employees I failed? I said those were his business decisions. He should have faced them before creating a permanent housing plan out of my temporary injury. He accused me of caring more about a condo than my son. I answered, "This is not condo versus son. This is consent versus access. You chose to use access." Then I placed Rose's revocation on the table. I told the family Trevor had no authority to contact a bank, agent, facility, building employee, insurer, or service provider in my name. Any request from him would be refused unless I confirmed it directly. Trevor laughed bitterly. "You hired a lawyer against me." I said I hired a lawyer for myself. The difference was the whole story. I removed the formal move-out notice from the folder. Trevor's expression changed before I said a word. I told him the guest room arrangement would end on the date listed. He had enough time to find housing, but he would not continue living in the home he had marketed without permission. Carol whispered my name. I looked at her and said, "He cannot keep the access that made this possible." She nodded slowly. Trevor said I was making him homeless to prove a point. I said he had income from current work and more than a month to find a legal room. He was not being abandoned. He was being required to plan for his own life instead of replacing mine. He said he would leave that night. I told him that was his choice, but he could not take anything that belonged to me. He looked toward the bundles by the door. That was when I cut the blue straps. The boxes unfolded across the floor with soft, hollow sounds. I handed him one. "You ordered these for me," I said. "They are yours now." He stared at the box. I told him I would not pack my dishes, my books, or my table. I would not sell my home to fund Northline. I would not sign the Maple Grove form. I would not lend him money against my savings. And I would not explain those decisions again as if clarity were cruelty. Trevor dropped the box on the floor. "You would rather watch me lose everything." I said, "No, I would rather watch you decide what is actually yours to lose." He pointed at the email and asked whether I planned to show it to his employees. I said no. His business consequences belonged to him. They involved his lender and the people he employed. I was not trying to destroy him. I was refusing one thing. He could not use my home as the part of his business he had never earned. Carol asked whether there was any amount I would consider lending. Trevor looked at me with sudden hope. I said no, not now. Not after the listing, the family announcement, the false work order, and the attempt to turn an expired vehicle authorization into control of my home. Money given under pressure would teach the same lesson all over again. He sank back into the chair. For the first time that evening, he looked 21 instead of like a presenter. "I was scared," he said. I believed him. Then he added, "I thought you would see the whole plan. I thought you would understand that it made sense." I said, "It made sense only if my recovery belonged to you and my life was a resource instead of a life." Trevor covered his face. Nobody rushed to comfort him. Nobody attacked him either. The silence was not punishment. It was the absence of rescue. After a minute, Ellen asked whether the farewell dinner was actually a farewell. I looked at the cake and said, "Only to the plan." Carol laughed once through her tears. The sound loosened something in the room. I cut the cake. The icing still said, "New beginnings, Diane." I gave Trevor the first slice. That may sound kind, but it was not surrender. A boundary does not need cruelty around it to remain closed. We ate cake while the dinner food cooled in the kitchen. Trevor said almost nothing. The relatives asked me direct questions for the first time. Was I staying? Yes. Was the condo off the market? Yes. Was my ankle still limiting me? Only when the weather turned cold, and that was a fact about my ankle, not a plan for my address. Did I need help? Only with carrying the unopened boxes into Trevor's room. Carol's husband and Ellen stacked the boxes against the guest room wall. No one packed for Trevor. That was his work. By the time the family left, the dining table was still mine. The cake plate was empty, and every person in the room knew whose decision had been ignored. At the door, Carol hugged me. She said she would never again accept news about me without calling me directly. Ellen apologized for offering away my table. I told her the young couple from church could have my old floor lamp if they wanted it. I was not opposed to generosity. I was opposed to being distributed. Trevor remained at the table after everyone left. The blue shirt he wore for presentations was wrinkled at the elbows. He asked whether I had ever loved him as much as the condo. I sat across from him and said the question was designed to make ownership sound like rejection. I love you, I said. That is why I helped until helping became permission. I am stopping now because I want a relationship with you that does not depend on what you can pull from me. He asked whether I would change my mind if he apologized. I said an apology might change our relationship. It would not cancel the move-out notice or create a loan. Consequences were not a fee he could pay with the right words. He nodded slowly. Then he asked the question I had wanted him to ask all week. What did this feel like for you? I told him it felt like surviving a crash and discovering that the person who helped me stand had also decided I should never stand alone again. It felt like seeing my broken wrist turned into a signature I had never given, and my healed ankle turned into an address I had never chosen. It felt like standing in my own doorway while everyone else discussed where I would live next. It felt like discovering that every favor I had given him had been converted into evidence that I would eventually give the rest. Most of all, it felt like being alive inside an inheritance he had already started spending. Trevor cried then, not loudly. He looked down at his hands and said, "I did not think of it that way." I said, "That is the problem. You did not think of me as the person whose way mattered." We sat there until almost midnight. Nothing was fixed. He did not suddenly understand every harm, and I did not offer a softer ending because the conversation had become emotional. When he went to his room, he carried the first empty box with him. The next morning, the condo was quiet. Trevor left before I woke up. On the counter, he had placed his building fob and a note saying he would stay at the workshop for a few nights while he found a room. I called him once to remind him that the workshop lease did not allow anyone to sleep there. Then I stopped managing the solution. By Monday, he had rented a room from a former classmate. He returned for clothes in the evenings. He packed without asking me to tape a box or make a phone call. We were polite. That distance hurt, but it also showed me how much work I had been doing simply because he waited long enough for me to do it. The lender took back the spray booth under the loan agreement. Trevor sold his display cabinets, surrendered the van, and moved his hand tools into a shared workspace. He finished the jobs he could complete by hand and let one employee go with the final pay she was owed. Northline did not disappear. It became smaller, mobile, and honest about what it could afford. I did not celebrate any of that. People sometimes imagine boundaries feel like victory from the first moment. Mine felt like grief with a locked door behind it. I worried about Trevor. I checked my phone too often. I still did not send money. At the end of the month, he carried the last box to a borrowed truck. The guest room held pale rectangles where his shelves had covered the wall. He handed me both physical keys without being asked. I gave him a receipt for them because exact language was still part of who I was. Before he left, Trevor said, "I understand why I cannot stay." He did not say I had overreacted. He did not call the condo his future property. Then he said, "I am not ready to talk about all of it yet, but I know I made your recovery sound like incapacity." That sentence told me he had finally seen the mechanism. I thanked him for saying it. I did not invite him back in. The locksmith changed the cylinder that afternoon. The building manager removed Trevor's resident access. The sound of the new lock turning was quieter than I expected. 2 months later, Trevor sent me a letter. Not a presentation, not a plan, and not a request. He wrote that he had treated fear like authority. He admitted Northline's debt had frightened him, and my accident gave him a story that made taking control look responsible. He apologized for making the family doubt my account of my own life. He also wrote that he was meeting with a small business counselor and paying himself a fixed amount instead of treating every incoming check as proof that the next month would work. There was no dramatic promise. He did not ask me to invest. That absence mattered more than any polished sentence. I agreed to meet him for coffee in a public place. We talked for an hour. He asked about my work. I asked about the shared workshop. When the check came, he paid for his coffee and I paid for mine. It was a small thing, but our relationship had needed things that belonged clearly to each person. The guest room became my translation studio. I moved my desk away from the dining table, added shelves for reference books, and put a deep green chair by the window. Lee helped me hang a print above it. Carol brought a plant and asked where I wanted it instead of deciding where it should go. I kept one of the empty moving boxes. I flattened it and slid it behind the closet door. Not as evidence and not as a threat. I kept it as a reminder that care can become control very quickly when nobody checks for consent. The rest went to the building's recycling room. I carried them down myself in 3 trips. On the last trip, I met a new resident waiting for the elevator. She nodded at the cardboard and asked whether I was moving out. I smiled and said, "No, I am finally settled." A week later, I drove through the intersection where the crash had happened. My hands tightened on the wheel, but I kept going. Fear came with me. It did not choose the route. My condo is still mine. Maple Grove never received my signature. Northline never received my equity. Trevor no longer speaks for me, and the family calls me directly. Those are not symbolic changes. They are the visible shape of the boundary. I used to believe helping meant preventing the people I loved from hitting the ground. Now, I know the ground is sometimes where responsibility begins. My son did not need my apartment. He needed to learn that love does not turn another person's recovery into collateral. The boxes arrived because Trevor believed my future could be packed before I objected. In the end, the only life they carried out of my home was the version of our relationship, where his emergency automatically became my obligation. If someone is making plans for you and calling your resistance fear, remember this: concern asks, control announces. And no matter what happened to you yesterday, or how many relatives have already been invited, you are still allowed to keep your own keys.